you know him from his cEDH Budget Brews YouTube videos and cEDH website that brings cEDH decklists to the masses on a budget. A real OG, it's Timmy T1000. Thanks for joining us, Timmy.
Thanks for having me.
For those that don't know you, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what is cEDH Budget Brews?
Sure. I'm Timmy T1000, as everybody has said, as I have been graciously introduced as. I run a little website called budgetbrews.club, which is the cEDH Budget Brews website, where it hosts community resources, places to play, links to different community deck lists, different places to get information, as well as templates for help building help streamlining decks kind of semi cheaply. There are some $5-10 stuff on there. And as well as a page for hosting deck lists of 500, 750, 1000, and budget lists. And then last but not least, we have tournament final pods as well as competitive popper commander decks. So the site has a little bit of everything, but it runs the gauntlet from as cheap as possible all the way up to people, the decks people are winning with.
What's the kind of the origin of the site? How long have you've been doing?
So the site has been up in one form or another for 3 years, 4 years at this point. It originally started as a way to host $500 budget decks, $500 budgetized versions of cEDH decks, and to host a mana-based template that I had built to kind of give people a resource for just finding good lands that aren't super expensive. And then it kind of grew from there. To where I'm hosting multiple budget tiers, including a full-on cEDH decklist database. So, and just to kind of back up a little bit, you had mentioned you had asked me what budget cEDH was, right? Did I miss?
Yes.
So in essence, really, budget cEDH is neither cEDH nor budget, unfortunately. Building a cEDH deck on a budget is kind of counterintuitive to the true essence of what cEDH is, and building a $500 deck, while it's a fraction of the cost of its original version, isn't quite considered budget. They're more aimed at kind of people who have smaller, modest collections and are wanting to kind of start to power up a little bit, I guess.
A lot of times, if you go to an LGS and they have sponsorship with Wizards, they don't allow you to proxy.
Yeah.
So a lot of the kind of the expensive cards you can't use. So I think your site really helps those people find other options.
Yeah, reasonable substitutes. Yeah, totally. That's kind of my aim. I just kind of had to pick a name and go with it, and that was kind of what I did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
recently you had a brewing event.
I did.
Can you share with us kind of what that was about and how did it go for you?
Sure. So I hosted a 1K cEDH deck submission. That ended on the 17th of June. That was a couple weeks ago. And we got about 75 submissions. Of those 75 submissions, about 35 made it onto the site. And then I kind of had 10 finalists. And then of those 10 finalists, 6 got a prize, including a Force of Negation, which was the first place prize.
What were the criteria that you were looking for your submissions?
So I kind of left the submission criteria vague. It just needed to be a budgetized version of a cEDH deck. It had to be legal as of the final submission date, which was on the 10th of June. So that was Nuka Penna, right? Came out June 10th? Yeah, because Commander's Legends, because that was legal then, right? Oh,
I saw some submissions that had the Archivist of Ogma.
yeah,
So
yeah. So it was
whenever,
Commander Legends was the most current setup. Honestly, they come out so fast now I can't even keep track of them.
yeah,
So it was whatever
exactly.
set was legal on June 10th night.
And what was the budget limit
It was
for that?
$1,000, including the commanders. Could not supersede that, and just needed to be a legal deck. Uh, it had to have like a basic primer, and then at least some explanation of obvious omits. And I know that's a little vague considering it's already $1,000 version of like a $5,000 deck. You're already gonna have obvious omits, like Mox Diamond, for example. But kind of what I meant by that was like, oh, let's say you're playing Consult Kess, or you're playing Kess, and for some reason you're not on Taina Pact. Like, why aren't you? Because it's
Yeah,
a $6 card. Sure, the mana base can be restrictive, but I need to know. Like, you need to have
yeah,
some thought into it. Stuff like that. Like, or if you're on like a dockside deck and you're not playing, I don't know, like stuff like that. Kind of like just things that are kind of, and then that was really the upfront criteria. The unwritten criteria was that I wanted to see lists that were as streamlined as possible given the budget constraints, and that at least looked on paper like they would play relatively smooth into like that no proxy meta. Um, so like some of the submissions that didn't get approved or that didn't quite make it were like ones that were more high power, not really budgetized cEDH decks. Um, there were some decks that didn't make it because they didn't really write a primer. They just like had like two sentences and they're like, all right, I'm good. There were a couple of decks that were over budget, even though I kept checking the sheet and making sure. Even though I tried to correct some of that stuff if possible, just to kind of give everybody a fair shot.
I was hoping we could run through the top six, and then you can kind of give things that you liked about each list and why it made the top six. So let's start at number six. It's Minsk Beloved Ranger by Helenium. Why did you like this deck? You said there was a lot of Minsk decks.
There were
What did you like about this list?
So what stood out for me with this mince list versus some of the other ones was that Helenium really, really, really was able to compress the combo package very tightly and made it layer very well, so that way you could kind of assemble different like if your Hulk pile kind of went wonky, you could pivot it into something else pretty easily.
Mhm.
And the ability to kind of resolve that pile was very focused. Also, the mana base was really good. And he has a pretty robust interaction suite
Mhm.
as well. So that was mainly what I liked about it. I liked the fact that he included like both Birthing Pod and Vivian to kind of give him the one card, like to be able to assemble what he needed pretty handedly. So the inclusion of natural order and he just did a really good job at rounding the deck out very well and kept his Hulk pile his Hulk package expansive but very focused. So the reason why I didn't place higher was because the primer was a little like it was good, it just wasn't as good as some of the other men's decks, but I liked the build better, or I felt that it was just a little bit like tighter, like a little bit tighter.
Next at number five was Hulane, Teller of Tales by Chaotrix. I think this deck had a couple interesting cards in it.
It did.
Why did you choose this deck for number five?
So, for one, Bant's kind of in a weird spot. Like, that's kind of what I wrote as my... Because the mana bases are very clunky. Because there's just... Essentially, your half of your land package doesn't have the same amount of printings as the two other parts of your land package. So you're very gated on your blue-green lands versus your blue-white and your green-white. So being able to make a nice, effective, well-rounded mana base in these colors can be challenging, and Chaotrix did a really good job on that. Furthermore, Chaotrix was able to assemble most, if not all, of the core combo parts for Hullen. You got the Lorwyn in, the Intruder Alarm. Was able, obviously, the cheapest creatures were in, and just kind of, and was able to like get some good interaction and as well get some relatively robust like card advantage. Just kind of did very well all around, I think. Also, the primer was very solid as well. I did give quite a bit of bonus points for like people who had a well laid out primer versus people who had more of a lackluster primer. Like there were some decks that I would have placed higher if they had more in-depth primers.
At number 4, there is Timna and Dargo by Espont.
Yep.
This deck looks like it has a lot of flavor. Doomsday, Razaketh, a lot of good stuff in there. What did you like about this deck?
So what I liked about the deck was it had a very nice in-depth primer. It laid out the lines really well. Took into account the budget in those lines. Dargo Timna is just kind of a... Not only is it a fun... Like, Mardu turbo decks can be... Like... How do I put this? From a budgetary standpoint, they can actually punch higher than their budget tier pretty consistently. Like, I would feel pretty comfortable taking, like, a focused 1K, like, Mardu, like a Dami Mami list, like the Mardu Nas list, and place it against decks that are higher budgeted, and I would not feel uncomfortable doing so. Obviously within reason. Whereas, like, if I took like a 1K Kess, I would not be as I would be more hesitant to how far I would stretch that budget gap. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, like, again, it's got a really good mana base. It keeps the breach lines in play. It's doing Cloudstone stuff with Dockside. I am a little sad that it didn't have, like, a Phyrexian, Phyrexian altar in it, but can't have everything. And the Dockside Cloudstone lines are good, and there's a decent amount of like zero cost fast mana to kind of help smooth everything out. The deck can leverage Nas pretty well because it's got a very robust ritual package. That's another reason why I like red black, particularly as more of like a proactive strategy on a budget. Is rituals are cheap. Sure, rocks are expensive, but you can kind of shore it up a little bit with some of the rituals, as well as playing Dargo. You get access to Burnt Offering and Sacrifice, and you can leverage them very well. And since you're not on Oracle, you're on like Dualcaster Mage shenanigans a lot of times.
Yeah.
Like, you can leverage that red really, really well. So, like, say, like, you built, like, a Grixis Nas deck, it can be a little more challenging.
Let's go to number 3. Number 3 is Inalla, Archmage Ritualist by Lipstick. Looking over the list, nothing really stands out too much from like a regular Inalla list, but I thought they had a really nice primer. What were your thoughts on this list?
While Inalla doesn't get spice points, it's a very effective deck. Shout out to Mikey J. I have been dunked on by him many a times with it. Yep. I felt that Lipstick did a really good job of keeping the core of the deck together, kept a very high density of tutors. Was a little, like, I might have wanted to see, I won't quite say more interaction, but I would have maybe liked to see a little more of the budget dedicated to, like, some free interaction of some sort.
Yeah.
obviously I don't have like a great like all the free spells outside of the one that's in here. The biggest obvious omit that I see is there's no misdirection. I would like to see that in the list, but Lipstick did such a good job on the primer, and overall the deck is very, very solid and can execute a game plan very well, especially for its budget, I thought. So that's why it placed where it placed, basically.
At number 2 is Oswald Fiddlebender deck by Jackus. This one has a lot of stacks in it. What did you like about the list, and why did it make number 2?
Okay, so the reason why I made number 2 is, if you compared, like, for example, Deke, who's a very well established deck builder, plays a lot of Oswald and did a lot of brewing. If you compare Deke's list to this list, they share a lot of cards. In fact, pretty much the cards that aren't in this list that are in Deke's list are the ones that are priced out. Like, if my biggest complaint is that you're missing Mox Diamond and that you're missing stuff, stuff like that. Like, the list even has Mana Crypt in it.
Yeah, I saw that.
You know what I mean? I do wish it was on Goblin Cannon, but that's because I just always liked watching Deke kill me with it. So that's totally like an editorial opinion, I will admit. But overall, the deck looked pretty well constructed. It had a great primer, and just seemed to be like a good start for anybody looking to kind of piece together Oswald. And in fact, the Oswald list, if you took out like 3 cards, you would drop the deck down to 500 almost immediately. So if you removed Mana Crypt, that's almost 200. And then if you cut some of the, if you cut like Chalice of the Void and a couple other things, like it would drop really fast. So being that, it can kind of be a good entryway into cEDH, especially if you're wanting to play stacks, and especially if you're wanting to play mono white. And then having a commander that's a tutor in the command zone just really helps kind of smooth out those lines. Furthermore, if you'll notice, the number 2 and number 1 placed positions were from newer commanders that are powerful in cEDH commanders. So that is another reason why I did pick this one over some of the other submissions, was that it was more recent, so it's fresher in the public mind, and it's nice to see like less established commanders have such a good build and to help highlight it.
And finally, at number 1 is Deke cooking up a Rocco Cabaretti caterer list. What did you like about this list, and why did it get the number 1 spot?
Okay, so first off, again, new commander. 2, I like Rocco personally because I think having a Naya Quarter Calling in the command zone is a pretty good spot to be, especially for meeting like cEDH-esque metrics for what would qualify as a commander. Sure, it's not a Grixis Turbonaws, but not everybody can be Grixis Turbonaws. So it's nice to have something that is powerful enough that you can use to help leverage Dockside. You can help use it to tutor out hate pieces as you need it, as well as assembling your combos. You get a couple of different 2-card combos with Rocco. You get Teamer Sabretooth and Dockside, obviously. You get Ashaya and Quirion Ranger to kind of help make a bunch of mana because you have a ton of dorks. You can leverage things, and then you have Food Chain as well. And you play under all of your rule of law. Like, you play under Deafening Silence really well and Stony Silence also. So I think Deke has a very high tutor density. The mana base is really good. The interaction suite is really good. It just really stands out. I would like to note that a couple of the lower submissions, if the mints list had a better primer, I probably would have placed it higher. Personally. So,
were there any decks that we didn't talk about that you wanted to highlight that you might have really liked but didn't make the top 6?
So there were 4 other decks that I put in the top 10. There was just too many, honestly. Like, that was my problem, is like I had to get real nitpicky to kind of separate the top, like once I got those 30 lists, I had to get pretty nitpicky for the most part to separate the 35 from the 10. One that I did like that was kind of cool was this Lannis Cryptozoologist by Pingo Dice. Oh boy, 85. I just, I they just did a pretty swell job, kind of capturing the essence of a just kind of a underrepresented commander. It's one of the more fringe cEDH decks, or one of the more fringe decks on the database, but I think they did a good job kind of putting all the parts together. The primer's really good, explains everything. They've got a pretty robust, like, with their combo lines and just stuff like that. It does kind of explore more of a unique space for Simic versus the, like, Kinnons or the Thrasioses of the world. So, even though it does play Kinnon.
Thank you so much for the interview, Timmy. If you want to check out his website, the links are down below. Up next, we have a game between Timmy and Playing with Powers Higher, so stick around.